Part 82. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 823. This is really interesting. Subai also didn't expect that the reason why he was eliminated as a suspect by Diana was because of this. But soon, Subai said again. This doesn't make sense. If according to what you said, the deceased Simon died in the afternoon, but the old housekeeper called everyone to come for dinner. The 9 of us sit in basically the same position every day. If there is no a person, everyone should have discovered it by then. Diana smiled slightly and said, I know you have put yourself into the perspective of ordinary people, but some things are still beyond the scope of ordinary people, such as the dinner at the dinner table. One person plays the role of 2 people, not surprising at all. A blind trick? Blindness? Is that what you Chinese call it? I prefer to call it blurred vision. Diana reached out and rubbed her notebook gently. Actually, it's not difficult to prove this. We just need to simulate the dinner scene. Just do it once. This method should be easy to identify the direct suspect, but if you only identify the suspect, you will not be able to obtain enough convincing evidence for everyone. At least, in the eyes of others, even if I now take the initiative to assume the leadership task of this investigation, I still cannot gain the trust of others. Everyone is not that simple. I estimate that many people will think that I am just deliberately being high profile and sincere. To clear their suspicions. You are thinking too much. Don't forget, we now have 2 votes. What you have to do now is just to win over 2 more people, or 3 people, that is enough. You are perfunctory with me. You Chinese people sometimes seem very hypocritical. I can guarantee that even now, even if I give you so much trust and warmth, even if I turn you into the first suspect, I took the initiative to take off my identity and take it upon myself, but you still don't fully believe me. Besides, comforting people is not like this. Among the 8 people, 1 is the murderer, and the murderer cannot vote for himself. The other is me, and I will not kill myself. Then there are 6 people left, and you and I are not sure either. So I have to make sure to win 4 more people, which is twice as difficult as the 2 people you just mentioned. Subai did not dwell on the issue of trust for too long, but changed the subject and said, the question now is, when did this note appear? After dinner, Diana said with certainty, I can confirm that when I left the room and went downstairs to have dinner, this note did not appear in the room. Does that mean that the murderer took the initiative to kill without giving any motive in the broadcast? Actually, even if the absolute motive is not given, it does not affect the killing, because everyone knows what the broadcast wants to see in the villa trapped by the storm. Just like many listeners in the real world do not receive the broadcast in real life tasks, you also know what you should do to gain favor from the broadcasters. This is also applicable in the story world. However, this murderer is obviously much more decisive than us. He has the confidence to take the lead without seeing absolute benefits. He may even have been preparing from the first day he entered here. Can the alibi of those in the gym be confirmed? Subai asked. No, because there are many cubicles in the gym, and there are showers and rest areas. It's not just a few people practicing their face-to-face for an afternoon. Under the premise that I exclude you and me, there are 6 people, all with opportunity to kill. After going around for a long time, your investigation seems to have yielded absolutely nothing. Well, for the time being, that's the case, Diana admitted, but she didn't seem to be panicked at all. Actually, I just said that some investigations don't need to be so detailed at all. We should just reenact the situation at the dinner now. I can guess who the suspect is, but I don't have enough evidence. Are you worried about alerting others? No, I'm just worried about the murderer's mentality. We have all killed many people. There is no doubt about it. But if the murderer's mentality is terrible, if he really calms down and treats himself as an ordinary person, a murderer, so what I prepare now will make it difficult to obtain the evidence I want. As she spoke, Diana shook a black bottle in her hand, which seemed to contain some powder. What's this? Taifan, this villa has its own storage room. One storage room is dedicated to storing some common medicines and emergency medicines. I discovered this place on the first day I came here. Yes, Subai nodded. He had naturally checked here. But the owner of Zhao's villa also seems to be a person who believes in traditional Chinese medicine. The small pharmacy contains not only Western medicine but also a lot of traditional Chinese medicine. Iron powder is actually stored as part of traditional Chinese medicine. Ingenious prescription, iron powder. It not only transforms saliva and calms the mind, but also specifically suppresses liver evil. If there is excessive anger and excessive liver evil, iron powder can subdue it. It seemed that after seeing Hill's set of Eastern swordsmanship and Tai Chi-like exercises, Subai was somewhat immune to the fact that these foreigners were more knowledgeable about ancient Chinese culture than the Chinese himself. He did not bother Diana was actually able to recite such an obscure ancient medical book, but she said directly, "Typhon, are you here to find fingerprints?" "Yes, fingerprints," Diana confirmed. This is a powder visualization method. By selecting metal or non-metallic powder that has a large color contrast with the surface of the object, and taking advantage of the low adhesion of fingerprints, colorless fingerprints are turned into layered colored fingerprints. The method of operation is to dip a soft bristled brush into a little powder, gently flick the brush handle to spread the powder evenly on the fingerprints, and then shake off or gently brush off the excess powder with the tip of the brush. The colorless fingerprints can be turned into colored fingerprints. Piano. Subai said these two words decisively, since it was the murderer who placed Simon's body in the piano. Then when he lifted the piano frame, his fingers should have touched that location. If there is an accident, there should be my fingerprints and the murderer's fingerprints. Because when Subai found the body, he also opened the piano stand. Diana shook her head. Under the conditions here, extracting fingerprints is the best that can be done now. DNA testing like PCR machines is obviously unrealistic, but since the murderer killed before the announcement was broadcast, moreover, in order to confuse the audience and blur the time of the deceased's death, a blindfold was used at the dinner, which made the subsequent investigation more difficult. So, I don't think the murderer would not take precautions when killing people. For example, put on gloves, or do the finishing work yourself. If the murderer really does this, then he will be much better than you in putting himself into the mentality of ordinary people. Diana shook her head. Subai sat down on a chair in the gym and asked, "Can you determine Simon's death time?" "I am a great undead magician." Diana looked at Subai and actually revealed her identity directly. "My research and understanding of corpses, even if I am an ordinary person now, is still not what you can compare with. Yes, I can even be more certain about the time of death, for example, around mid-afternoon. At that time, what is certain is that there was no announcement on the radio and the murderer took it upon himself to kill in advance. But according to what you said, the murderer probably identified the target on the first day and had been planning to kill him at 3 o'clock this afternoon. He succeeded in killing Simon when the clock was ticking, so why did he use a blind eye again at dinner? This is something I still can't figure out," Diana said. "Currently, it is speculated that it was to confuse the public and cover up her absence at the time." Subai reached out and touched his chin. At this moment, his thoughts and feelings seemed to slowly return to the time when he established the killing club. How did he feel every time he killed before and after killing? Diana's eyes narrowed slightly. At this moment, she seemed to feel that Subai sitting in front of her was an out-and-out murderer. That kind of temperament and feeling was that of ordinary people, and that of a murderer among ordinary people. It seems that everyone has a story. No, the murderer did not want to confuse the public or create any alibi, Subai said with a smile on his lips, because even if you investigate based on the time of death of the deceased that you have determined, who has a strong enough alibi, proof? Except for you and me who are trusted by you, you just said that the alibi of the 6 people cannot withstand scrutiny and confirmation. If that is the case, why would the murderer have such a dinner? So, what's your conclusion? Haha, Subai smiled, and then said in a very gloomy tone, these stupid people, they know in their hearts that this story world is about killing people, but they are all waiting for them. Broadcast notification. Although I have already guessed the rules of this story world, I still dare not take this step. People, I killed them, but you didn't notice. Since you are so stupid, then I will play with you again. Diana stuck out her tongue and licked her lips. She was a little surprised, because Subai was now simulating the murderer's mentality for psychological profiling. So, in your opinion, what the murderer did at dinner? It's a stroke of self-reward. Subai paused and continued, but it's superfluous. It seems that you have found the answer. Diana took out a pack of cigarettes from her pocket, took out 2 cigarettes, bit them between her red lips and lit them together, then handed one of the cigarettes to Subai. Subai took the cigarette and took a puff. I can even guess who the murderer is. He feels so good about himself and is so showy. How come he looks so familiar? Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 824. Let's do it again. Subai stood up and said to Diana, since he feels good about himself and adds extravagance, there is no reason for us not to seize this opportunity. Have you thought of the crux of the problem? Diana looked at Subai and blinked. In the real world, Diana was a French criminal policeman, but just now, she felt a sense of past from Subai. The feeling of chasing a fugitive. Killing by listeners is completely different from killing by ordinary people. Killing by listeners, to put it bluntly, is no different from killing animals. It is like killing chickens and sheep. Because the improvement of life level leads to changes in mentality, the listeners are killing people. At that time, I didn't feel that I was killing someone. I had no panic or fear. I had no worries about the law, and no care about retribution. But when ordinary people kill people, they look forward and backward, and have various psychological changes. Just like Subai, who just conducted a psychological test on the murderer. Greeting people, replaying the dinner process at night, even if you can't remember some details, as long as you can roughly know who is sitting next to you, what kind of clothes they are wearing, etc., Subai said. Okay, I'll go right away. Diana and Subai left the gym. There were 6 people sitting in the living room, looking very calm. They were all people who were used to seeing big winds and waves, and it was impossible for them to behave like ordinary cowering women crying in ordinary murder environments. You should know the exact time of death of the corpse when I ask you. I am a necromancer, so don't have any doubts about the time of death of my corpse. I am a professional. Simon, the deceased, died around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. As soon as Diana said this, everyone present showed a look of surprise. There were no really stupid people here, so everyone immediately thought of the crux of the problem, which was that there seemed to be no one at dinner. I feel like there are few people. After giving everyone present 3 minutes to think, Diana clapped her hands and said, so I feel it is necessary to replay the scene at dinner. After saying that, Diana looked at the old housekeeper. Old housekeeper, can you tell me? Sorry, I can't. The old butler smiled slightly. Obviously, as an outsider, the old butler was the one responsible for serving food and cleaning up when everyone was dining. Naturally, he could see more things that insiders couldn't see, but the old butler's meaning is very simple. Everyone just needs to treat him as if he does not exist. He will not be a witness or provide any information about the murderer. This is a dedicated NPC. Okay, then Diana was not that disappointed. Apparently the old housekeeper's response was what she expected. She said directly, please repeat the process you used when you called us to have dinner tonight. For example, what did you do? No matter what dish comes, we have to go through the previous process, and the rest of us have to step into our own roles and start over. That's no problem, the old housekeeper agreed. Okay, now everyone, think back to where you were and what you were doing when the old butler called us to eat. Please go back to where you were at that time, pretend to do what you were doing, and try your best to reenact it. Recall some details at that time, such as what you saw the person opposite you doing, or what you saw the person next to you doing. Try to interact with it, or remind you, okay, now you can prepare. Wait for the old housekeeper to send a notice to start dinner. Diana clapped her hands, indicating that it was time to start. Everyone left the living room one after another. Diana glanced at Subai meaningfully. She knew that this reenactment should be just a cover, and Subai should have other methods. Diana, Lucy, Peek, Zhaorui, and Subai walked to the second floor together. At that time, they all said in their confessions that they were sleeping or reading in the room. Muntalihi and Su Gang went to the gym, while Chen Ming walked out of the entrance door and went outside to look at the scenery. Subai opened the bedroom door, walked in, and waited. Dinner time. The old butler's hoarse yet penetrating voice sounded. Whether you were sleeping or listening to music with headphones, this voice could clearly hit your eardrums. Subai's mind immediately pictured the scene where the owner knocked on the food bowl, and then a group of puppies immediately ran over and waited to eat. After waiting for a while, Subai opened the door and saw Lucy standing next to his door. I remember you walking ahead of me when I went down there, Lucy explained. Subai nodded, and then began to walk down. Obviously, everyone was in a state of mind, and even the subtle order could be distinguished by reminding each other. Those in the bedroom, those in the gym, and those outside looking at the scenery all came to the dining room. There was a long white table in the dining room, similar to the table used by European nobles in the movie. Let alone 9 people dining, 20 people dining. You can sit down easily, and the meals are served one by the old butler for everyone to help themselves with the public tableware. It can also be regarded as a buffet style. Because everyone was not familiar with each other at the beginning, when they sat down to eat, everyone consciously sat next to each other, which meant that there was an empty seat between them. Then in this specific atmosphere, they sat down for the first time. The position has become a fixed position for everyone during subsequent meals, which can be regarded as a tacit understanding. Everyone pulled out their chairs and sat down. The old butler began to serve the food, and everyone also began to recall the details at the dinner table. One said what that person was eating at that time, one said that that person ate a lot of that, and another said that. The fork made a loud sound, and everyone reminisced together, verifying each other at the same time. At this time, the seat of the deceased Simon was undoubtedly vacant. Sitting next to Simon were Lucy and Peek. For some reason, everyone could not recall Simon's behavior at the dinner table. This is also normal, because Simon died before the dinner started, and he did not come to the table to eat at all, but everyone did not feel that someone was missing. Obviously one person played the role of 2 people. In this case, the sense of presence is naturally very low, and the murderer does not dare to make any sense of presence. When the old housekeeper came over with an empty plate and said it was borscht, Lucy suddenly said, I remember the person sitting next to me said something about leaving some borscht for me, the lady, and then the old man the butler said there were enough for all the dishes. When Lucy said this, she looked at Simon's position, and then looked at Peek further away. Peek shook his head and said, I never said that. In fact, I really don't like drinking that borscht at all. The question appeared here, and everyone suddenly became quiet. It was obvious that in the mutual memories and confirmations, the repeated situation finally fell into a paradox at this time. Someone in that position said to leave some borscht for Lucy, so that means the murderer left his position and sat in Simon's position. I remember when the borscht was served, some people had already finished eating and were ready to leave, Subai said. Everyone sat down and started eating first, and they could leave when they felt they were done eating. There were no special restrictions. Diana nodded and said, "Indeed, I didn't drink borscht, which means I might have left for the living room at that time." "You can't say that," Chen Ming said, "the dining room is connected to the kitchen and the living room. Our dining table is facing the door of the living room. If you want to go back to the bedroom on the second floor, you must first enter the living room and then go upstairs." I think, at that time, no one would choose to go into the kitchen to help the old housekeeper wash the dishes, right? Chen Ming then made another gesture, drew a circle, and said, "Actually, it's very simple. The murderer only needs to show his and Simon's presence. No matter whether the murderer makes up and removes it quickly or even in Chinese Sichuan opera. But his only route and the most suitable route should be at the beginning of the dinner and towards the end of the dinner. During these two times, people come and go, which is suitable for him to play the roles of two people, and for all of us meals are very short and depend on where Simon sits at all times." Su Gang stood up, pointed at himself, then at Lucy next to him, then at Peek and Subai over there, and said, "Only the people sitting on our side have this opportunity. It is impossible for the person sitting across from you, after playing himself, to circle around, walk to the living room and then back, or walk to the kitchen and circle around. This will definitely attract attention. Only when you are sitting on this side, with Simon, you can take advantage of the time when you come over to eat in your own place or Simon's current place, then get up, go to another character's place to continue eating, etc. When you come back after the meal, you can change your identity again to deepen your impression again." Having said this, Chen Ming pointed at himself, then at Lucy, followed by Peek and Subai. "That is to say, the murderer is among the four of us. Oh, by the way, female detective, you have excluded Wang Yi, a Chinese. In other words, the murderer is most likely to be among the four of us, Chen Ming, Lucy and Peek among the three. I can tell this logic and put myself among the suspects. If I are temporarily excluded, the murderers are Lucy and Peek. They are next to Simon's position, and it is very convenient for one person to play two roles." "Absurd, your logic and inference surprised me. Of course, I agree that what you said is very reasonable, but in my opinion, the murderer should be you, Lucy and Wang Yi, the three of you, sit down on this side, the murderer must be one of you." Lucy shook her head and glanced at Chen Ming, Peek and Subai in turn. Obviously, her view was that among the three people excluding herself, there must be a murderer. "That's very clear. Now let's look for evidence." Subai stood up and nodded to Diana, who took out the iron powder bottle and a small brush. "It's amazing that you can actually make something that collects fingerprints." Peek began to admire. "Let me think about going to the piano. By the way, the murderer's fingerprints may be left there." While saying these words, Peek's eyes wandered around Lucy and Chen Ming with great interest. Obviously, when Subai asked Diana to take out the iron powder, he temporarily excluded Subai from the scope of the murderer. "Except." "Sorry." Subai shrugged and walked between Lucy and Peek, standing behind Simon's chair. "We are not sure whether we can get fingerprints on the piano, and everyone was not sure at the time. After checking the body and the piano, although the probability of leaving fingerprints on the switchboard is not high, I feel that since the murderer was bored enough to play a superfluous game, the fingerprints on the piano should have been eliminated, and the murderer may even be naturally. It is impossible to leave fingerprints during the murder process when wearing gloves. Then what do you think of this?" Peek looked at Subai in confusion, but suddenly stopped talking. Subai looked at Peek with a half smile, and his finger was pointing at the chair where Simon was sitting. "This chair is still leaning against the table and has not been pulled out. In this state, it is impossible to sit on it and eat. There will be fingerprints of 3 people on this chair." Subai continued. "One belongs to the old housekeeper, because he tidies this place every day, pushing all our chairs in and placing them neatly, and the other of course it's Simon, and there's another one, who's the murderer. The murderer can wear gloves when killing, but I don't believe that the murderer will also wear gloves when eating, otherwise it will be impossible for everyone to discover. Moreover, fortunately Simon is a male. Mr. Peake, you wouldn't take the initiative to pull out a chair for a man and invite him to sit down, as a gentlemanly act, right? Of course, Ms. Lucy would not do this. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 825. Haha. Peake smiled, then reached out and touched Simon's chair. What this means is actually very clear, because if the real murderer is not found in this world, everyone except the real murderer will be punished. Under the premise, no one will cover up the real culprit, and no one will deliberately destroy evidence. You should have guessed who I am, right? Peake reached out and patted Subai on the shoulder. You stinky bat. The pretense of coquettishness in you is so strong that it almost turns into water droplets. I can't even pretend to be confused. Subai looked at Peake calmly. Okay, everyone here, give us some time to chat. I am the murderer, and I admit it. Okay. Peake waved to everyone present generously, and then walked straight to the entrance. Everyone looked at each other, but no one stood up to stop him, because the deadline for voting was after dinner tomorrow, and there was really no need to control Peake. What surprised everyone was just Peake's generous attitude of admitting it. Subai followed Peake out of the entrance hall. It was raining outside. Fortunately, there was a pavilion and aisle outside the house where he could take a walk. Although the rainwater came in from time to time, it was nothing. You did this on purpose. Subai spoke first, because he could feel that Peake, oh no, it was the stupid mistakes made by Hills in this murder. This feeling, Subai could relate to it because he was the same way back then. Every time he planned to kill someone, Subai worried about whether he would be implicated, but every time he found that he was not implicated or suspected, he would feel a little bit unwilling, just like you had done something. Things that I think are awesome, but no one knows about it. It's a bit like a pearl secretly casting a secret shadow, walking at night in brocade clothes. But at that time, Subai was just a killer who needed to kill to vent his mental illness. In short, he was a mental patient. But now, Subai is a high-level listener. Today and the past are naturally completely different. A concept. Therefore, Subai felt that Hills should not really do this. This is the first show, just a warm-up. Hills seemed very indifferent. For him, if you are discovered, you will be discovered. It is a story world where both advanced listeners and non-senior listeners participate. Broadcasting generally adopts a clear distinction. Although both groups of people are in the same story world, they still play their own roles. The highlight this time is actually the scene they saw when they first entered the story world, and here, just a warm-up. So you don't plan to continue playing this mentally retarded game? Subai thought of the story world where he met Lan Lin Piaolu and Yan Huiyang. This was indeed the case. No, I didn't say that, otherwise I would be too conceited. I didn't expect that woman to find a big fan, and I didn't expect you to be able to associate it with the fingerprints on Simon's chair. How should I put it? It's not that I didn't want to play on purpose. I can't play this game anymore because of you. If I said that I deliberately wanted to lose the important event that I was preparing for the next game, it would also appear that I was too shameless. As you Chinese would say, I was putting money on my face. Hills put his hands on the railing. You will continue to play, right? I need that reward, Subai said. Hills nodded. I support you. Hills didn't have any resentment at being caught by the police as a murderer. By the way, if it's convenient, I'll collect more useful information here. I think I just entered the environment of this story world should be related to Zhao's villa, and even in the highlight, you should be able to find some clues here. I don't have the time or opportunity, so it's up to you. In addition, no one lives in the innermost one on the second floor. I left something for you under the bed in my bedroom. Thank you then. You're welcome. Hills looked at his already wet shoulders, shook his head helplessly, turned around and prepared to walk back to the entrance. The 6 people in the living room were still sitting there. When Subai and Hills returned, everyone's eyes naturally fell on Hills. Old butler, the pasta you make is delicious. It tastes very similar to the pasta my mother made for me when I was a child, Hills said to the old butler. The old housekeeper smiled and nodded. Is it still okay to kill someone before the vote tomorrow? Hills asked. Everyone else in the living room was startled when they heard this. They were obviously worried that Hills was planning to kill the whole gang and then pull another person to support him. It was undoubtedly a case of being killed in vain when the real culprit had been found and he could avoid punishment. A very frustrating way to die. No, the old housekeeper's answer was simple and straightforward. I knew it, Hills stretched. What the broadcast wanted was murder and suspicion in a closed environment, not a big fight, and the person who ensured that this rule was implemented was the old housekeeper. With him at the helm, the game will continue steadily and the plot will not deviate from the direction intended by the broadcast. Then I'll look around again. Hill's eyes casually swept across the 6 people present except Subai. Since I didn't find any of you as a target, isn't this request too much? Everyone was speechless, because the provocation in Hill's words was obvious. Furthermore, everyone also saw the identity of Hills from a series of actions after he was identified as the murderer. If nothing else, he should be a senior audience member. And with the opening environment of entering the story world as a foreshadowing, it is obvious that everyone knows that dying and being punished here is not the end in the traditional sense, but just the end in this game environment. Hills basically he semi-disclosed his identity as a senior audience member, which made most of the people present very afraid. If in the real world, facing Hills, most of the people here would have to bow down and shout "Sir" respectfully. It would be easy to say that Hills was completely defeated this time, but obviously, he is not. A complete death, so no one is willing to harm this senior audience without any benefit at this time. Hills reached out and hooked Subai's shoulder again. Let's go, I still have some activities that are inappropriate for children to do with you alone. Subai smiled helplessly. Hill's move was equivalent to placing himself at the same level as him. People here could probably guess that he was also a senior audience member. However, Hill's probably didn't deliberately dig holes for himself, because exposing himself as a high-level audience at this time has both advantages and disadvantages. Even if we are all ordinary people now, if those senior people choose Subai as the murder target, the psychological pressure will still be great, but it may also increase the likelihood that Subai will be suspected in the future, because there is already a senior person in front of him. Listen to what you have learned from the past as a murderer. Subai and Hills went directly to the second floor, but the 6 people in the living room politely did not follow them. 2 senior audience members wanted to whisper, but who would be so ignorant as to rush over to join in the fun? The 2 went up to the second floor, walked all the way in, and stopped in front of the door of the empty room in the innermost room. A piece of wire appeared in Hill's hand, and he easily opened the lock cylinder. So professional, Subai said. I'll take that as a compliment. Hills motioned for Subai to come in. Subai's eyes fell directly on the bed, because Hills said before that he left something for himself under this bed. Hills was not sure about the old housekeeper's attitude before, so he told Subai in advance to let him come and see, but now that I can continue to move freely for a while, I can personally lead Subai to see what I have discovered. Do you know why I think you are stupid? Hills squatted down and lifted the sheets, because most of you are thinking about how to kill people and how to hide yourself, but you ignore the real hidden treasures here. I think your eyes are like a group of fools standing on a pile of gold fighting each other to death over a few pieces of bronze. But the first one to kill for bronze. Subai looked at Hills and said. Hills was stunned for a moment, then realized that the metaphor he had just used had also damaged himself. Come on, the first day I entered this so-called Zhao's villa, I felt something was wrong. The first floor of the entire villa from east to west is the indoor swimming pool, gym, kitchen, dining room, and living room. The westernmost part of the second floor next to the living room is the bedroom. But have you noticed that there is no garage here because of the specially designed chain bridge? Therefore, people must park their cars at that end and walk over. Therefore, aren't you curious? The westernmost side of the ground floor and the second floor are bedrooms. What is the area below wrapped in walls and cement used for? There is no obvious door to enter, but it is impossible to deliberately ignore this area when designing this villa and fill it directly with cement, right? There is no other cave. Sudbai really ignored this point. To be precise, basically all the audience ignored this point, because as soon as everyone entered here, they were replaced by their own thoughts, waiting for the murder and the game to begin. Even when it comes to exploring the house, everyone has only scratched the surface. It is estimated that not many people are aware that there are unreasonable areas here, and not many people are aware of it and are really willing to find and study it. As for why hills can be found, Sudbai suddenly had an image in his mind of standing next to the coffin at the place of enlightenment, hearing a knocking sound, and then looking up to see Hills, who had holes drilled in his head and a bronze mirror actually punched out. This guy is a born expert at digging holes. Bye, what are you thinking about? Come and take a look here. Hills reached out and lifted up the two wooden board covers. In a corridor appeared. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 826. So. Sudbai's voice was filled with a little doubt, then a little questioning, and finally, are you humming playing with me? Expression. Just because not long after coming down the corridor under the bed, a metal wall appeared in front of Sudbai. There was a door on the wall that could only allow one person to enter and exit, and the threshold of this door was relatively high, more than half a meter. He reached out and knocked on the door. It was definitely not metal skin, but a material and thickness similar to that of a bank safe. I don't have time now. Anyway, you can think about how to kill people and how to open this door at the same time. The door is an electronic lock. It seems to be an advanced electronic lock that requires fingerprint and pupil verification. Come on. Hills looked like I'm very optimistic about you. You mean to ask me to plan how to kill people and hide myself while developing TNT explosives here, or to try to crack this password lock in a place where there is no computer? Well, it's a bit difficult, but that's what makes it challenging, isn't it? Hills patted Sudbai on the shoulder. Sudbai calmed down at this moment, then frowned and said, tell me, could it be the place where we appeared at the very beginning when we entered the story world? Hills was stunned for a moment and nodded subconsciously. How about you guessing more boldly? According to what you mean, in fact, it is our true self placed here. Is it possible that some demon is sealed? This is a sci-fi game suspense story world. It can't be like The Cabin in the Woods. It uses science fiction as the cover and has a lot of incredible undead creatures. And according to my understanding of the structure of this room, the space below the second floor, is actually almost comparable to the space in the laboratory we were in at the beginning, and I don't think there will be any basement. Why? If you want to build a basement, there is no need to open this space in the house. Do you understand this? Sudbai asked. Haha, it doesn't matter whether I understand it now or not. By the way, who do you plan to kill next? Hills asked. He was already out anyway, so he could ask Sudbai what he plans to do next with this card. Beat. I'm not sure yet, Sudbai replied. It's not that I don't believe you, but I'm really not sure yet, and killing people deliberately is too blunt. Random killing, Hills shook his head. Diana and Chen Ming are very sharp. Are you confident that you will not leave any traces in the case of random killing? I am very experienced in killing people, Sudbai said. Who isn't? Hills was just about to say something sarcastic, but then he thought of Sudbai's previous description of his psychological test. Thinking about it, it seems that this is true. How should ordinary people commit murder? Regarding the matter, my colleagues in this fraternal unit do have more say. After the two finished chatting, Hills rearranged the bed and walked out of the bedroom together. Fingerprint and pupil verification are needed. When he was about to reach the stairs, Sudbai suddenly said, "Is it that the old housekeeper's fingerprints and pupils are needed?" "Then there's no solution," Hills shrugged. "Here, he's just a bug." That night, some people slept in the living room, and some returned to their bedrooms. The old housekeeper personally admitted that no new murder cases would be allowed to appear before the voting deadline tomorrow. Therefore, who was sleeping in the living room at night? No one knows whether they are really scared or whether the people who go back to the bedroom to sleep really sleep peacefully. For breakfast and lunch the next day, Sudbai didn't come down to eat. Instead, Hills sat down to eat, and no one said anything. They were able to sit down and feel calm with the murderer who had just killed his companion. Eating on the ground, only creatures like the audience can do this. When dinner was over, Sudbai came out of the room. Hills took the initiative to sit next to Sudbai. "What are you doing sitting in the room all day long?" Hills didn't believe that Sudbai was studying how to make TNT explosives under the existing conditions. Rest. Hills. The dinner was very peaceful, because everyone knew what would happen after dinner. After everyone finished their dinner, everyone sat in the living room and waited. Sudbai sat on the sofa first, and Hills took the initiative to sit with Sudbai. Sudbai had a look of disgust on his face. "I'm about to die, and you still don't comfort me. If you are really going to die, you will definitely not have this mentality now," Sudbai said. "Now, please start voting. I will ask you one by one. You only need to point out in front of me who you suspect is the murderer." The old butler packed up the restaurant and came over to start the voting ceremony. It was very simple, and no one was even nervous at all, but Sudbai knew that this was because the murderer had been exposed long ago. If the murderer was not sure until the next vote, then the voting atmosphere would not be so relaxed. Everyone chose Peak, that is, Hills, and even Hills himself chose himself. Then, the old butler announced the final result, as if he was completing a ceremony, and the old butler was a devout believer who presided over the ceremony. Immediately afterwards, a hand of the old housekeeper suddenly grabbed Hills's shoulder, and then the two figures disappeared in an instant and reappeared in front of the dark red wall opposite the living room. Hills was very calm, even though the old housekeeper was constantly squeezing his whole body into the wall, and his body was constantly disintegrating and turning into pus. But from the beginning to the end, Hills did not scream once, until he died. The others looked at the scene with some shock. When the old butler who had been serving everyone's food, clothing, housing, and transportation in the past few days suddenly changed. When he became an executioner, he showed two completely different temperaments, which really made people feel a bit unable to turn around. This wall seemed to come alive, actively sucking. In the end, even Hill's clothes were swallowed up, and not even a drop of blood was splashed on the old butler's body or even his hands. "Come." Sudbai's fingers gently rubbed the surface of the sofa, and he suddenly had a feeling that this dark red wall should have been dyed red on purpose. If nothing else, the broadcast seemed to be very interested in this story world. I have always maintained a high level of interest, and this scene is not the first or even the second or third time it has been used. Is the world of stories that fascinates broadcasters so much and opens up one after another, really just as simple as it seems on the surface? "Everyone, you can rest." The old butler bowed slightly to everyone. At this time, he seemed to have returned to the meticulous and peaceful old man. At the same time, he also kindly reminded, "A new day has begun." This reminder means that a new round of murder can begin. Most of the people have gone back to their bedrooms. At least tonight, new depression will come down. Everyone is an ordinary person. No matter how powerful they were before, they don't have much courage to show off now. Even if this death is not the end, but looking at the fate of Hills being forced into the wall in the end, it is also a bit jaw-dropping. Sudbai glanced at the piano and asked the old housekeeper, "Where is Simon's body?" "Put the packages in the utility room and let the police pick them up after the storm is over." Sudbai was speechless for a while. "The murderer asked you to squeeze into the wall. Why are you talking about the police at this time?" Back in his bedroom, Sudbai washed his face first and then took a shower. For some reason, Sudbai felt uneasy after dinner. Sudbai didn't think it was because Hill's death scene affected him. He was not that fragile. So, where did this inexplicable feeling of irritation come from? Case, 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 case. In the middle of the night, there was a slight rubbing sound from the window. Sudbai quickly opened his eyes. He was sleeping very lightly, so he could be easily awakened. At that moment, Sudbai held the kitchen knife that had been placed under the pillow with his back hand. He stood up and walked slowly to the window. "There is someone. Are you ready to take action on yourself?" The window was closed, just like the door was locked. Even Sudbai didn't dare to tell the truth at this time. Therefore, Sudbai didn't open the window immediately to check the situation outside. The murderer wanted to murder. Rather than killing yourself, murder has more meaning than direct killing. Because everyone has evil intentions, the remaining 7 people will not all sit in the living room to monitor each other and hug each other to keep warm. However, if someone wants to kill him, then he can alarm others and make the other party's plan go bankrupt. The other party does not dare to kill people blatantly. But at this moment, there was a sudden boom in the living room, as if something exploded. At the same time, the glass in front of Sudbai was directly smashed. The two happened at the same time, which meant he watched the movement in the living room to cover up the sound of the other party breaking in through the window. The timing is calculated and it's perfect. A black shadow jumped directly onto Sudbai. At the same time, a foul and familiar smell penetrated Sudbai's nasal cavity. Sudbai subconsciously stabbed the kitchen knife into the opponent's chest with his backhand, only to find that the kitchen knife was stuck by the opponent's body. Damn, how is this possible? Aren't we all ordinary people? Sudbai knew clearly that the other party was not wearing armor. The opponent grabbed Sudbai's neck with both hands, and pressed Sudbai to the floor with far more weight than an ordinary person's body, making it difficult for Sudbai to move or make a sound at this time. This is no ordinary person. Definitely not an ordinary person. The other party suddenly raised his head, his pupils were full of black holes, and his face was ashen with the aura of death. Simon. This is actually Simon. For a moment, Sudbai suddenly understood. Damn. Someone refined Simon's body into a zombie. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 827. One day, just one day, during the time yesterday when Hills admitted that he was the murderer and the old housekeeper did not allow the murder to happen, there was a person who had already designed and prepared this murder. It is even possible that the other party was preparing for murder earlier, but he was just waiting for a corpse to appear. Whether it was the explosion in the living room or the zombie, from the sound masking at the beginning to attracting other people's attention, etc., it all shows that this is a carefully planned killing. With his neck being pinched, Sudbai could no longer breathe. His lungs were aching as if they were on fire. At the same time, his consciousness was getting weaker and weaker. Hypoxia. When your body becomes that of an ordinary person, it seems that only then can you deeply realize how weak you are at this time. In a pure battle of strength, it is difficult for you to defeat a zombie, and Sudbai's kitchen knife cannot even penetrate the opponent's body. When all the listeners have become ordinary people at this time, A zombie is used as a murder tool. It's like putting a wolf into the flock of sheep. Subai knew that death here was not the end, otherwise Hills would not be so calm, but he was killed by the other party with zombies, and as soon as Hills walked away, he followed behind. He would probably be laughed to death by that bitch Hills. 2 high-level listeners were eliminated in succession, which was a disgrace to the high-level listeners. There was no sign of pupils in Simon's eyes, as if they were covered by black mist, but Subai knew clearly that the zombies were alive. Zombies are another unique kind of life born from the dead. For other people, zombies are dirty and a symbol of disaster. But for Subai, zombies have a very kind feeling. A feeling of. At least, Subai, who has 2 bloodlines of vampire zombies, would never allow himself to die at the hands of a low-level zombie, even if he was an ordinary person now. Subai's eyes were fixed on Simon's dark eyes, and at the same time, Subai began to call him silently in his heart. It is true that ordinary people are ordinary people, but just like the appearance of Simon, the zombie, a listener here can still temper a zombie even under the conditions of an ordinary person. This means that even if the listener is an ordinary person, they are just ordinary people in body and soul, but in many other aspects, they are actually very different from normal people. Subai himself is a zombie, so he can understand zombies. In this simple environment, turning a dead man into a zombie in such a short period of time naturally cannot rely on high-end magic weapons and runes. It should be the most primitive method. Zombies are a kind of alien creature created by the resentment of heaven and earth, but their true origin is actually the dead man himself. Simon was resentful because he was the first to die. As a listener, he was actually regarded as the first target. Moreover, Simon did not know that Peak, who attacked him, was a high-level listener. Therefore, Simon when he died, he was filled with great resentment. This was a kind of trampling on his own self-esteem, because choosing him to kill meant that the murderer thought he was the softest persimmon. Simon, Simon, I know you are not convinced that you died, I know you feel you died aggrieved, I know your resentment. Subai slowly found that feeling in her heart. Slowly try to communicate with the other person. The call seemed to fail to get the slightest feedback from Simon, but Subai did not give up. Before he felt that he was really going to be strangled to death, Subai shouted loudly in his heart. Since you are dead, are you still willing to use yourself as someone else's tool to benefit others? Buzz. Subai only felt that Simon's body suddenly trembled, and a light green light flashed in the originally dark eyes. At the same time, the hands that were originally strangling Subai's neck slowly lost their strength. Subai breathed heavily. At this moment, he could deeply realize the wonderful feeling that fresh air can bring. The faint green light shining in Simon's eyes, in Subai's view, was a disguised awakening of Simon's self-awareness. All living things, even flowers, plants, and trees, had their own spirituality. At this time, Subai spread his hands, continued to grasp the feeling, and began to tempt Simon. Subai didn't know how to refine zombies, or even how to control zombies, but he was able to communicate with zombies, just like Gong Gai Chang in history was able to communicate with birds, because Subai understood zombies and also had the ability to communicate with zombies. He understands zombies, and he himself is a member of the zombies. Simon stood up straight, his body still stiff, and the green light in his eyes flickering on and off, which meant that his own consciousness was at war with the consciousness that controlled him. Subai got up, without hesitation, opened the bedroom door and ran out. A gentleman does not stand under a dangerous wall. Only now did Subai realize that he had underestimated this group of people before. Where was their murderous intention and plan? The appearance of the head zombie almost refreshed all of Subai's previous predictions. When Subai was about to reach the stairs, he bumped into the old housekeeper who had just walked upstairs. The old housekeeper didn't say hello to Subai, but passed directly by Subai and entered Subai's room. The old housekeeper is the NPC here. Subai doesn't believe that the old housekeeper is helping him fight monsters, nor does he believe that the old housekeeper will have any special regard for him and take care of him. Since the old housekeeper went to his bedroom, it is obvious that he wants to go and get rid of that zombie. This means that someone died just now. Therefore, in order to ensure that no accidents would happen to the remaining living people during the next day of reconnaissance and voting preparations, the old housekeeper had to deal with the zombie first. As for how the old housekeeper would deal with Simon, Subai ignored it. He walked to the stairs and saw 5 people standing there in the living room, and a charred corpse was taken out and placed on a white cloth. This must be the body. Wait a moment, Subai suddenly frowned. Could it be that the explosion just now was not to cover up the sound of zombies breaking the window and entering his house? But why do the two sounds happen together? That zombie seemed sure that there would be an explosion. Subai would never believe it was a coincidence. Then, the most likely possibility is that the murderer actually planned 2 simultaneous murders. It seems that he must make sure to kill at least one person. This murderer was more ruthless and murderous than Hills. Subai walked down the stairs. The 5 people in the living room were Chen Ming, Lucy, Su Gang, Diana, Muntali. Among the 9 people before, the ones who had been killed and punished were Simon and Peek. In other words, the charred corpse in front of them should be Zhao Rui's. She had just died and was badly burned. She was not dead when we came down after the explosion, but she could neither speak nor move, so she could not leave any information, Diana said. Obviously, what Diana meant was that Zhao Rui did not identify the murderer because of severe burns when he was about to die. In fact, Zhao Rui may not have known who the murderer was. However, according to the most vicious nature of human nature, to guess, it must be that Zhao Rui was indeed unable to move or even lost consciousness at that time, with only a little physical activity left. Otherwise, a dying person who was killed could easily identify a murderer and drag most people into the water together. Punish. This was the result of Subai's analysis from his own perspective. Subai was a little lucky. Fortunately, when Zhao Rui didn't die just now, he was actually fighting for Zhao Rui's life. Subai believed that if he had been killed by Simon just now, the old housekeeper would probably appear in the living room immediately and take out the excellent, best, heaven-defying healing medicine to save Zhao Rui, because a person in the 24 hours after death, the old housekeeper will not allow another person to die. This game has its own rhythm, and it is a way of cooking small dishes instead of making a big stew. You are injured. Chen Ming suddenly pointed at Subai and said, "Is it possible that you were attacked just now?" Obviously, Chen Ming knew that Subai was the last person to rush to the living room. No one present would believe that Subai did not hear the explosion clearly because he was too asleep. Moreover, Subai's injuries were so obvious. At this time, the old housekeeper suddenly appeared like a ghost and handed a bottle of ointment to Subai. Subai took it in his hand, smelled it, and asked, "Cure corpse poison?" In the past, Subai naturally didn't have to worry about corpse poison or not. He himself was a zombie. But now that this body has been injured by a zombie, it will really be a big trouble if he doesn't deal with it. Yes, the old housekeeper replied, then stood aside. He sees the whole situation, but he never says a single useful word. "I'm sorry, I guess everyone won't be able to sleep tonight. We have limited time." The old housekeeper also said just now that the voting deadline is this time tomorrow. Therefore, all of us, except of course the murderer, must seize the time to conduct the investigation. Still follow the last arrangement. Wait. Subai stretched out his hand to interrupt Diana's words, and everyone looked at Subai in surprise. Subai turned around and looked at the old housekeeper and asked, "Old housekeeper, I would like to ask, if you commit suicide, and the living people find another scapegoat, does this suicidal person win the game after leaving this story world?" The old butler's eyes suddenly narrowed, as if he was considering whether his answer would affect the fairness of the game, but he knew that his existence was to safeguard the progress of the game, and to facilitate the explanation of the rules of the game. Therefore, Sudbai's this question he must elaborate and answer. Calculate. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 828. Do you suspect that Zhao Rui committed suicide? Diana asks Sudbai. Sudbai pressed his hand, indicating that he would answer Diana's words later, and then continued to ask the old housekeeper with a chance mentality. Old housekeeper, has anyone else asked you this question? The old housekeeper smiled and said nothing. The meaning is very simple. It is impossible for you, Sudbai, to answer this question. Fortunately, Sudbai didn't have much hope in getting an answer to this question. He sat down on the sofa, then handed Diana the medicine bottle the old housekeeper just gave him, and asked Diana to help him put it on. Medicine. Diana was not restrained and directly poured out the ointment and began to apply it on the wounds on Sudbai's body. At the same time, she said, "What do you mean? Is today's investigation based on whether Zhao Rui committed suicide?" Sudbai could understand Diana's worries, because once this was used as the basis for the investigation, it would be difficult to find the real culprit if there was someone else, which could easily lead to everyone going blindly. The explosion was near the kitchen, right? Sudbai looked at the marks on the ground and the blackened walls in the kitchen. The gas tank exploded in the kitchen, Diana said. At the same moment as the explosion, a zombie broke into my room through the window and attacked me. That zombie was Simon. I don't believe it was just a coincidence. In my opinion, the explosion in the kitchen was probably a cover for the attack on my bedroom. Of course, if Panzayou committed suicide, she might be doing double insurance for herself. Chen Ming said at this time, double insurance? Then, according to your logic, if you are killed by a zombie, then she, Zhao Rui, has been burned. As two people who were attacked at the same time, she will definitely you're eliminated from our suspect list, and if the zombies can't kill you, after all, ahem, we can guess a little bit about your identity. If the zombies can't kill you, then she, Zhao Rui, can commit suicide. Killing herself in a way that we can't think of but still having a high chance of becoming the biggest beneficiary is taking advantage of our blind spots in thinking. Sudbai's eyes swept over the faces of everyone else, and he affirmed, let's conduct investigation and evidence collection based on Zhao Rui's suicide, such as what she has been busy with recently, such as what traces are there in her room, such as her recent whatever you have taken, whatever you can recall, whatever you can investigate, don't let it go. I suspect that Zhao Rui may be similar to the enhancement of Taoist priests. What habits do Taoist priests have? Analyze it yourself. We must find absolutely reliable evidence as soon as possible. If we can't find any evidence, we can only turn back halfway. Put the object of suspicion between us living people. One is because Sudbai has the first round of evidence to find out that Hills is the murderer, the other is because everyone has already guessed that Sudbai should be a senior audience member, and the third is because Sudbai was suffering from the murderer when Zhao Rui died. Zombie attack, so everyone basically didn't think Sudbai was the murderer of Zhao Rui, so when Sudbai told the main line of the investigation, no one present had any objection. Lucy and Su Gang went to the second floor to adjust Zhao Rui's room, while Chen Ming and Diana went to the swimming pool, because Zhao Rui had gone to the swimming pool several times during this period, and there might be something discovered there. Muntali and Sudbai first went to take a look at the place where Simon's body had been placed. On the way, they asked the old housekeeper where Simon had been disposed of. After receiving no answer from the old housekeeper, Sudbai and Muntali walked outside the house again. At this time, The heavy rain had just stopped a little, and it seemed to be preparing for the next downpour. It was also muddy outside. The chain bridge is still broken, and therefore, Zhao's villa has basically become an isolated island. In addition to the villa, there is also a forest behind the villa, but the area of the forest is also very small, and it is surrounded by cliffs. They are really peach trees. Subai looked at these trees and said with some surprise. Planting peach trees in this place and this climate would cost a lot, of course. This is the story world of broadcast design. If it is willing, it can be done even if ham grows on a tree. What are we doing here? Muntali asked with some confusion. He knew that Subai might be a senior audience member. Even though he didn't call him sir, there was still a little awe in his words. Look around to see if there are any newly cut trees or which trees have wounds. There are not many things that can be used by Taoists in this place, but peach trees can be considered the same. If Zhao Rui is really a Taoist type enhancement, she should get some raw materials here. Is there a relationship between peach trees and zombies? Muntali still can't understand. He is a Westerner, and the story world he usually experiences is also a story world with a rich Western cultural atmosphere. He is not very familiar with some enhancements and professions unique to China. Peachwood plays an extremely important role in our country's folk culture and beliefs. It is also called dragon subduing wood and ghost horror wood. It is the most widely used material for defeating evil spirits and making ghosts. Legend has it that Quafa chased the sun and died before the sacred trees were thrown out and turned into a peach forest. The earliest spring festival couplets in my country were made of peachwood boards, also known as peach charms. For thousands of years, peach trees have been said to ward off disasters and avoid evil, so they are called sacred trees. Forget it, no matter how much I explain to you, it won't make sense. Once you live through the story world and grow up in the future, you should have the opportunity to meet Eastern Taoist priests. Listening to what Subai said, Muntali couldn't help but feel a little at ease. Although Subai didn't say it exactly, it seemed that the other party didn't intend to kill him. In fact, the survival rate of this mission was still very high, and he should be able to survive in the end. 3 people survive, because in a 3-person environment, if one more person dies, and if the possibility of suicide is ruled out, then even if one of the parties is a killer, there will be no voting effect if they vote for each other. Therefore, according to Mentali's speculation, the old housekeeper should end the game when there are 3 people left, or even earlier. Now including the dead Zhao Rui, 3 people are dead, and there are still 3 people alive. There are 6 people left. The fewer living people there are, the narrower the scope of the murderer will be, and the worse the story will be. So Muntari feels that if at most 1 or 2 people die, the game will be almost over. The two searched for a while in the woods. Not long after, Muntali shouted from the other side, "It's here, it's here." Subai walked over, and sure enough, he found several cuts on the 2 peach trees discovered by Mentali. There are indeed people here who are Taoist priests. Subai reached out and touched these traces and found that they were several days old. It was obvious that the Taoist priest had really been preparing for it just a few days after entering the story world. Let's go back. Subai and Muntali returned to the villa. At this time, the other 2 groups of people also returned after completing the investigation, but they found nothing. Obviously, it seems that he has learned from Peek's mistakes. The murderer this time should be more covered, and at least the aftermath work should be done well. 6 people were sitting on the sofa respectively, exchanging their opinions with each other. Subai frowned at this time and said, "There is no way there are no clues. It is absolutely impossible. We are not passers-by and passers-by. To put it bluntly, we are wary of each other and are always planning our own murders. So, no matter what, whether Zhao Rui committed suicide or not, it is impossible for the 6 of us to not discover it at all. Absolute. There is definitely a place we have overlooked. Everyone, Let's recall again, Chen Ming said at this time. Let's see if there are any details that have been overlooked. If she wants to arrange a corpse and needs to do some magic and rituals to turn a corpse into a zombie, I think she needs a very spacious place. As Diana spoke, she suddenly raised her head and looked up. We seem to have never been on the roof. Everyone immediately got up and came to the second floor. In the innermost position of the second floor, there was a ladder and an exposed opening, which could lead directly to the roof. Before, everyone had only focused on places where normal people could stay, such as rooms and the swimming pool, but they really hadn't thought about the place on the roof. Subai was the first to go up, followed closely by Mentali, Lucy, and others. When everyone arrived on the roof, there were actually talismans and several mahogany swords placed in front of them, and there was also a rope fishing from the eaves. Go down. It's the string. Subai stretched out his hand and looked down along the string. Then half of him threw himself on the edge of the roof and looked down. The others also followed him and looked down. The place where the strings are connected is Zhao Rui's room, Lucy shouted at this time. This is definitely Zhao Rui's room, because I live next door to her, so there is no mistake. Muntali, please go down and confirm, Subai said to Muntali. Mentali went down immediately. After a while, he opened the window in Zhao Rui's room, reached out and pulled up, and easily grabbed the strings. It should be right. Subai stood up and patted the dust on his body. The purpose of this string should be to connect Simon's body to Zhao Rui at the same time. She can pass. The fluctuation of the strings can be used to estimate the degree of corpse transformation, because corpse transformation is a gradual process, and Zhao Rui cannot stay on the roof forever. Coupled with the weird explosion and the time when the zombies rushed into my room, there was no wrong. Zhao Rui actually committed suicide. She bought herself double insurance. What a powerful woman, Chen Ming praised. Diana was also a little sad, feeling that this woman named Zhao Rui had always been unattractive, but who knew she could be such a ruthless character. Breakfast is ready. The old housekeeper appeared at the opening of the roof and said. Everyone was already used to the mysterious old housekeeper. Now that it was confirmed that Zhao Rui had committed suicide, everyone felt relieved. They probably thought that they could have a good breakfast and have a good sleep all day long. Lucy, Muntali, Chen Ming, Su Gang, Diana, and others went down the ladder one after another, and no one waited for each other. Whoever went down first went straight to the restaurant. When Subai was about to go down the ladder, he looked at the old housekeeper standing beside him and asked, "Can suicide without discovery really be considered the final winner?" "This is the third time you have asked me." The old housekeeper looked at Subai with a meaningful smile on his face. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 829. Haha. Subai shook his head and was about to get off the ladder, but the old housekeeper standing beside him suddenly spoke again. "But you seem to have ignored a problem. Are you considered offside?" Subai was a little surprised and continued, "You are the host of the game. This is not offside. I can also responsibly assure you that there is no chance that my conversation with you will be eavesdropped. Moreover, I don't believe you didn't notice that issue. It's possible that Zhao Rui is not the one who refined the zombies, right?" Since the old housekeeper said so, Subai was not in a hurry to get off the ladder, but sat down next to him. "Yes, even if you deliberately point the evidence to Zhao Rui, if Zhao Rui is not the person who refined the zombies or the person who manipulated the zombies to try to murder you, then that person will definitely become suspicious and even have suspicions about you. I don't believe this so-called double insurance at all, because he is the one who controls the zombies, so the logic you throw out of double insurance is naturally untenable, and naturally I don't believe that Zhao Rui committed suicide. By then, you will probably be the murderer he believes in. Besides, in my opinion, you deliberately pointed the evidence to Zhao Rui's bedroom, obviously telling the person who made the zombies that the real murderer was. There is someone else, and the murderer is still alive. otherwise it would be impossible to change the evidence to point to Zhao Rui. Therefore, the person who refines zombies will never vote for Zhao Rui, a dead person, in the end, right? Who is his first suspect? I still don't understand. Is it really appropriate for you to talk to me about these things? Subai looked at the old housekeeper with interest. There are fewer and fewer people, and radio listeners will not particularly like a pure suspense story. When everyone listens to this story, it will be foggy from beginning to end, and they will also find it very boring and boring. I believe you have figured out this logic yourself, so cutting into the story and talking to you now will not affect the fairness of the game. Broadcasting is really considerate. No more. The old housekeeper waited for a while and was a little surprised when Subai just sighed. But I'm really too lazy to cooperate with his performance. This is a fair game. It's impossible for the broadcaster to see me unhappy and deliberately make it more difficult for me, right? In other words, if we are in front of a live screen or a radio announcer is broadcasting this story on a radio station somewhere in the world, then the audience or listeners should have guessed that I killed Zhao Rui. When telling a story, you should whet the audience's appetite, give them a sweet date, and give them hope, but you should retain suspense. Do you think I'm right? Hearing this, the old housekeeper was silent for a while, then nodded. You seem to have a deeper understanding of radio than I do. Subai reached out and patted the old housekeeper on the shoulder. Let's put it this way, we are actually traveling together. After getting off the ladder, Subai walked directly to the restaurant. When Subai walked to the restaurant, the elusive old butler was already serving dinner. Indeed, in this environment where everyone is an ordinary person, the existence of his old butler is really important. Is equivalent to a bug. The dishes were served one by one, and everyone ate with gusto. They all felt that it was certain that Zhao Rui committed suicide anyway, and they had a peaceful day to rest, and they were in a good mood. But Subai knew clearly that one of the 5 people, Lucy, Muntali, Diana, Chen Ming, and Su Gang, was pretending, because this person must know that it was not Zhao Rui who asked the zombies to attack him, and that he had taken the initiative to change the evidence points to Zhao Rui using Qin Xian, which means that this person knows that Zhao Rui definitely did not commit suicide. And this person will definitely not remain silent until the end, otherwise when everyone votes for Zhao Rui tomorrow, he himself will be regarded as a loser and will accept the punishment of the old housekeeper. The voting mechanism of this game is very simple, but under this simple rule, as many unnecessary twists and turns as possible are eliminated, making the game more pure. Unlike werewolf games, werewolves may also step on their wolf teammates or vote out their wolf teammates to enhance their own status. In the voting process, the interests of the murderer and everyone else are completely opposite. In the end, even if the person who refined the zombies took the initiative to stand up and tell everyone that I refined the zombies, it would not be surprising at all if someone changed the evidence to slander Zhao Rui. Compared with being punished, nothing else it doesn't matter. Ding dong. A crisp sound was heard on the dining table. Everyone raised their heads and looked over there. I think it's a little strange. The one who spoke was none other than Subai. Subai pushed the dinner plate in front of him forward, held his chin with both hands, and muttered, I feel something is wrong. Everyone was stunned, at least on the surface, everyone was stunned. Something's wrong, something's really wrong, Subai repeated. Have you noticed? Everything went so smoothly. We didn't even have to put in any extra effort. Of course, if Mentali and I went around the peach forest, it would be a waste of time for you to search Zhao Rui's room and the swimming pool. But it's still too simple, and there's one thing I really can't figure out. Subai reached out and rubbed his eyebrows. What's wrong? Diana asked. Yes, what's wrong? Could it be that Zhao Rui committed suicide? All the evidence points to Zhao Rui committing suicide. No, it's not like that. Subai seemed to have figured out something, and looked directly at the people at the dinner table and said, Mantalai and I found chopped peach trees in the peach forest. They should be used as raw materials. Yes, but this can only prove one thing. That is, one of the 7 of you and me, including Zhao Rui, is a Taoist priest. He went to the peachwood forest behind to collect local materials, but it cannot be proved that Zhao Rui is that Taoist priest. But that string leads to Zhao Rui's window, Lucy said. Subai glanced at Lucy, then looked at Muntali. Muntali, when you opened the window, was it difficult to reach out and grab the string? It's very close to the window. It's just a little above. It's not difficult, Muntali replied. He had been called by Subai to go to Zhao Rui's room and open the window to confirm. In other words, even if Zhao Rui, a woman, is not as tall as you, it would be very difficult for her to find something to stand on tiptoe or step on the windowsill to pull off the string and put it away or find another opportunity to dispose of it. It's a very simple thing, right? When Subai asked this question, everyone was silent. Yes, it is indeed very simple. So, do you think Zhao Rui won't leave such a big flaw? Chen Ming asked. Yes, this is too simple. It is indeed too simple. It is unimaginably simple. Let me ask you, if Zhao Rui committed suicide, how could she still leave such clear and obvious evidence? I admit that the way Zhao Rui committed suicide is very difficult to understand and very abrupt. It is even a blind spot in our thinking, and the location of the roof is also a blind spot in our thinking. But if it were you, as the murderer, you would definitely try your best to destroy all the evidence that is not conducive to you within your own power. You wouldn't be so lazy, right? Subai glanced at everyone present, and then said emphatically. I think that string is most likely the real murderer who deliberately put the blame on Zhao Rui. This murderer is following my ideas. I said that Zhao Rui might have double insurance for himself. So, if my idea and investigation criteria are wrong, it means that the murderer will definitely not be investigated in the end. Then, please step into the murderer's perspective. If you were the murderer, what would you choose to do? Deliberately leading us in the wrong direction. As for the murderer, as long as we are convinced that Zhao Rui committed suicide and all vote for Zhao Rui tonight, then the murderer will win, Chen Ming he spoke. Yes, that's right, and I'm sure that the person who manipulated the evidence must be the murderer. Subai pursed his lips. Everyone, it seems that we can't rest now, we only have this, it's daytime, and among the 6 of us here, there is a murderer who is still alive. Everyone took a deep breath and looked thoughtful, while Subai was observing everyone calmly. Wait a minute, Diana suddenly spoke at this time, and then she looked at Subai first. Subai was shocked, but his expression remained as usual. Isn't this detective girl still suspicious of me? Fortunately, Diana seemed to think that because Subai was the first person to reveal the suspicion of Zhao Rui's suicide, her thinking logically did not classify Subai as the murderer. Moreover, when the explosion occurred, Subai he was fighting a zombie and almost died at the hands of the zombie, so this didn't seem to support the logic that Subai was the murderer. It was you, Subai, who learned about the murderer by asking the old housekeeper. If the murderer committed suicide and was not found out by our investigation, then he would be considered a winner. So, the logic makes sense. I think that the murderer should not have thought that Zhao Rui committed suicide at the beginning. Only when Wang Yi mentioned this possibility and everyone began to investigate this aspect, the murderer would think of collecting the evidence. Pointing at Zhao Rui to confirm the fact that she committed suicide. Chen Ming and I went to the swimming pool to investigate. Chen Ming and I could confirm with each other that the 2 of us had been investigating together and had never been separated. Wang Yi and Meng Talai went to Tao's Hulin. When they came back, we were already in the living room. Waiting inside. This means that if you have the opportunity to arrange evidence on the roof during that time. Only Su Gang and Lucy went to the bedroom on the 2nd floor to investigate. The rest of the people looked at Su Gang and Lucy. Lucy stood up suddenly at this moment and roared almost at the top of her lungs. "No, there's a problem, there's a problem." Subai laughed in his heart. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 830. Lucy stood up, looking very abrupt. As the saying goes, the more you experience, the calmer you will naturally be. The experience of the audience is something that is unimaginable for ordinary people. Therefore, most of the audience, even if you don't deliberately practice or learn anything about psychology, you can basically keep your emotions and anger intangible. Of course, there must be a prerequisite here. At least this listener is not an experiencer or a low-level listener. Someone who has just become a listener. And Lucy obviously does not belong to this category. When broadcasting allocates participants in the story world, it is rare to foolishly put experiencers and advanced listeners in the same batch. Then, Lucy is at least an ordinary listener, but in Su Inbai's opinion, she should be one of the better ones even among senior people. Otherwise, she would not have been able to prepare everything in such a short period of time and wait for Simon's body to appear before stealing the refined zombie. Ability and psychology both illustrate her excellence. Yes. Subai already knew who was refining zombies, because the day before yesterday, when Hills was still wandering around leisurely all day, even if he was found to be the murderer, Subai had been in the restaurant and on the stairs on the second floor twice. Encountered Lucy at close range. Even though she deliberately used perfume and shower gel to cover up, Subai could still clearly smell the smell of corpse emanating from the other party. Corpse gas. Subai is very familiar with this thing. In the land of enlightenment, Subai's only source of energy and even survival is the corpse energy in the underworld. He can replenish himself by refining corpse energy and eating food to replenish energy. It's a truth. It is no exaggeration to say that corpse energy is to Subai what a painter is to paint and a blacksmith is to a furnace fire. But what Subai didn't expect was that Lucy, a woman, actually aimed the refined zombie at herself. She actually let the zombie kill her. This was something Subai didn't expect. Subai was still planning his own affairs while waiting for the opportunity. If Lucy kills people with zombies first, it doesn't matter. Anyway, Subai can also confirm that Lucy is the biggest suspect. Find enough evidence under the premise. But that night when Lucy let the zombies kill her, it really made Subai feel like he was watching others digging a hole and waiting to take pleasure in their misfortune, but he was pushed in. When Diana pointed out that only Lucy and Su Gang had the opportunity to go to the roof to place evidence, Subai was not surprised at all. This job was arranged by Subai. He went to the grove with Montalai himself and asked Diana to follow. Chen Ming went to the swimming pool and deliberately asked Lucy and Su Gang to go to the second floor to check the bedroom. After knowing that Lucy was the controller of zombies, Subai certainly didn't mind pouring a basin of dirty water on Lucy, and Lucy seemed to have sensed this crisis, because she knew that someone deliberately placed the string she was in that position to frame Zhao Rui's suicide, but it was not her fault because the person she wanted to kill was Subai, not Zhao Rui. This also means that the person who killed Zhao Rui wanted to make her the biggest stain. It can even be said to be a big light bulb. Under the big light bulb, the suspicion of the others will undoubtedly be much smaller. As for whether Lucy noticed him and regarded him as the first suspect, Subai was not sure. Therefore, he did not intend to beat Lucy to death completely from the beginning, because there was no stupid person here. But now that Lucy has become the target of public criticism, at least it will be of great help to Subai, the real murderer. Lucy knew that if she didn't stand up and be honest at this time, she might not have time. It was now morning and the vote would be around 10 o'clock in the evening. She absolutely couldn't delay. Simon, I made the zombies. I made the zombies attack Wang Yi, but I didn't kill Zhao Rui. I didn't kill Zhao Rui. When she said these words, Lucy didn't even look at Subai, not because she felt guilty, but because everyone's primary goal now is to find the real murderer, and everyone here should be thinking about how to kill people every day. Here, there is really no need to pretend to be sorry. Hearing these words, Subai frowned visibly, crossed his hands together, and exerted slight force. It wasn't that Lucy said something extraordinary. In fact, when Lucy spoke, she didn't name Subai as the first suspect. People, Subai just needs to express his anger appropriately. Maybe, because it was Subai who took the initiative to overturn the case and discovered the doubts after confirming that Zhao Rui committed suicide. From Lucy's perspective, it seems that the murderer did not need to do this. When everyone regarded Zhao Rui as a suicide, then when preparing to go to bed and wait for the vote at night, the murderer can just sit back and watch everyone's investigation time be wasted. This is the most beneficial option for the murderer. Therefore, Subai took the initiative to find out the suspicion that Zhao Rui did not commit suicide. From Lucy's point of view, it was a good idea, because everyone present, except the murderer, no one could see it more clearly than Lucy. The deliberately placed evidence said everything to Lucy. "Do you admit that you made the zombies that attacked Wang Yi?" Diana asked. "Yes, I admit it, but it didn't work out," Lucy admitted again. "Zhao Rui, don't you admit that you killed him?" Diana asked. "I don't admit it. I didn't kill him. I definitely didn't kill him," Lucy responded firmly. "I couldn't have used such low-level techniques to place the strings there to frame Zhao Rui for committing suicide. But everything seems to have two logics. You admit it now because we have overturned the conclusion that Zhao Rui committed suicide, which was very beneficial to you and Su Gang have become the subject of suspicion, so if you killed Zhao Rui, you have enough motive to plant that evidence to make us more convinced that Zhao Rui committed suicide." Before Chen Ming finished speaking, he was interrupted by Lucy's sharp shout. "Am I a god? Everyone here is an ordinary person. Just relying on the existing conditions here, I can successfully refine Simon's corpse into a zombie. It's already a lot of luck here. How could you still have the energy to kill Zhao Rui? You should know how Zhao Rui died. He was burned to death by a gas tank explosion in the kitchen. That means there was a device similar to a semi-automatic trigger detonation ignition. I simply don't have the time or energy to do anything extra. This explanation is not convincing enough for me," Su Gang said at this time, but it was obvious that he was also hesitating, because he voted for the wrong person, and voting out someone who was not the murderer was equivalent to failure for them. But at this moment, Meng Tailai, who was very honest, suddenly stretched out his hand and signaled everyone to stop arguing. Then he took out a piece of paper. When everyone was arguing before, he didn't say anything except answering a question from Subai, which seemed very strange. "It's quiet. He has always given people a relatively dull image." But when Subai saw him taking out paper and pen, his pupils couldn't help but shrink. Because Subai found that Meng Tailai's temperament seemed to have changed a lot at this time. Could it be that this guy has been hiding his clumsiness before? "Zhao Rui is dead," Meng Tailai stood up with a smile. At this time, he did not have the image of a reckless man at all, but looked very calm and wise. "Now, at least I can be sure that Zhao Rui definitely did not commit suicide." Muntari picked up a fork and drew on the tablecloth. "Because we have determined that the string pointing from the roof to the window of Zhao Rui's room could not have been caused by Zhao Rui's negligence. If she wanted to win by committing suicide, there was no need to leave such a clear evidence of. In other words, Zhao Rui definitely did not commit suicide. The evidence was deliberately changed by someone with intentions. No one except the murderer would place wrong evidence at this time. Is this clear to everyone? Therefore, Zhao Rui definitely did not commit suicide. This can be determined first. So, based on this argument, we can slowly divide it into two logics. 1. Lucy is the murderer. 2. Lucy is not a murderer. Muntari made two horizontal strokes on the tablecloth with his fork. First, let us consider the case in which Lucy is the murderer. First, she admitted that she refined the body of Simon, the first deceased, into a zombie. Diana, you are a necromancer. Please explain how difficult it is to refine a zombie under these conditions. Diana was stunned for a moment when her name was called. She seemed a little unaccustomed to Muntali at this time, but she still said, "It's very difficult, and it really depends on a little luck." "Oh, yes." Continuing to deduce according to the first logic, Lucy refined the zombie under very difficult and very lucky conditions. At the same time, she felt that it was not safe, so she designed a semi-automatic detonation in the kitchen. Gas tank installation. Then during that day, she planned to attack Wang Yi and Zhao Rui at the same time. In the end, Lucy was burned to death. Wang Yi was lucky and was not killed by the zombies. After saying that, Muntari scratched the first horizontal line twice with a fork. The first logic is impossible. Why? Su Gang asked. The first logic has been proven impossible here, because unless Lucy guessed from the beginning that we would think that Zhao Rui committed suicide, it is absolutely impossible for her to kill two people at the same time. With that said, Meng Talai pointed at Subai, because in this case, Wang Yi will be excluded from the scope of suspicion, because when Zhao Rui died, Wang Yizhen was attacked by zombies at the same time. In other words, Lucy herself, place yourself in a range where the suspect is 5. There are very few of us alive. Finding a murderer among 6 people who are suspicious of each other is completely different from finding a murderer among 5 people with Wang Yi, who is not suspected. So, do you think Lucy is so stupid? In addition, unless you Su Gang told me, Lucy has great confidence that we will analyze in the direction that Zhao Rui committed suicide from the beginning. In fact, before Mr. Wang Yi asked whether the old housekeeper could commit suicide and become a winner afterwards, I didn't expect this. But if Lucy is the real murderer, it is obviously impossible for Mr. Wang Yi to provide cover and cooperation for Lucy. Therefore, the first logic is here, and there is no need to deduce it further. So, when the first assertion was rejected, that leaves the second conclusion. Lucy. Not a murderer. In other words, the real culprits are Yu Su Gang, Chen Ming, Diana and Muntali looked at Subai. And Mr. Wang Yi. By the way, Mr. Wang Yi, on the day when you found out that Peek was the murderer, you stayed in the room without coming down to eat all day. What were you busy with? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 831. Everyone has their own characteristics, which are related to their childhood, family environment and acquired experiences. Just like the characteristics shown by Muntali now, his speech is very clear and his logic is very smooth. It seems that no matter how complicated the situation is, it becomes very clear under his arrangement. Until now, Subai himself had to admit that the reckless man who followed him to search in the peach forest had indeed successfully deceived his own eyes. Fortunately, he did not reveal any mistakes because of this. But the other party's last words clearly pointed the finger at himself. Is it intuition? Or, what evidence does he really have? Subai didn't know this, but one thing was obvious. No matter what the other party had mastered, if he was deceived by the other party like this, showed his cowardice or revealed some tricks, then Subai would really have been in vain. So, do you think I used that day to stay in the room to assemble the detonation device? Subai leaned back slightly and leaned on the chair, with a "you are great" look in his eyes. Look at Muntari. This is a game. Death here does not mean real death. Hills can accept failure calmly, let alone Subai. To say the least, it would be like being squeezed into the wall by the old butler. As long as he doesn't really die, Subai doesn't really mind if he turns into meat and blood. Therefore, Subai's mentality is really good now. No, I just want to ask Mr. Wang Yi to tell you what you were doing that day, because now I have determined that Lucy is not the murderer, at least not the murderer who killed Zhao Rui, so everyone present except Lucy, they are all subjects of suspicion, and I believe that everyone hopes to get as much information as possible. Montari's eyes swept across everyone present. Subai could feel that the eyes of Diana and Chen Ming had been leaning towards him intentionally. Obviously, because there is a logic, it can be explained very clearly, and it can even be described as a continuous coincidence. First, when Zhao Rui was killed, Subai was being attacked. Later, it was Subai who arranged for Lucy and Su Gang to go to the bedroom on the second floor. Investigation. However, at this stage, they can only say that Subai, who could have been removed, has been classified as a suspect again. Moreover, it is difficult for them to draw any useful conclusions and information from this series of coincidences. Because the killing of Zhao Rui was indeed Subai's work, but Subai himself did not expect that when his plan took effect, someone would actually send zombies to attack him. Several coincidences, were some of them intentional by Subai. How could we deduce anything valuable from this? First of all, I hope everyone understands that if I plan to use some kind of detonating device to kill Zhao Rui, and I want to make this detonating device, do I need to do it in a big way without even coming down to eat and hide in the bedroom and focus on research? I do this as if I am afraid that others will not know that I am doing something. Subai shrugged. You still haven't answered the question I just asked, Mr. Wang Yi. Muntali seemed to be biting Subai. Perhaps. People are born with this kind of intuition. Subai guessed that maybe Muntali felt that he was the murderer from this mess of clues. I can explain this issue later, and I can even tell you a secret about this villa. Now, we are talking about the death of Zhao Rui. Muntari, please skip this question first. Subai said confidently. Okay, Muntali nodded. Since Subai said so, he really had no reason to continue staring at Subai, because he really didn't find any evidence that Subai was the murderer. If Lucy is not the murderer. Chen Ming planned to continue his analysis. No, at this moment, Su Gang suddenly said, what if Lucy deliberately made a counter-logic? For example, similar to what Muntari you just reasoned, Lucy deliberately attacked two people at the same time to deliberately increase the difficulty. Deliberately placed oneself in an unfavorable situation, but relied on this method to remove oneself. Su Gang, you are great too. Subai heard Su Gang's speech and secretly praised him in his heart. For Subai at this time, he, the real murderer, should not be dragged into the muddy water and let these good people fight each other with wrong logic. It's best to be trapped and unable to get out. And Subai didn't think Muntali could find any evidence against him. Everything was annihilated in the kitchen explosion. But have you ever thought? At this point, Muntali paused and looked at Su Gang, if we can't find the real murderer and the real evidence in the end, who will we most likely vote for in the end? Hearing this, Su Gang was stunned. Yes, if there is no sufficient evidence to identify another person as the real murderer in the end, everyone will most likely choose Lucy as a dead horse to try their luck. Therefore, if Lucy is the murderer, she must meet three conditions. First, she must successfully refine the zombie under the existing extremely simple conditions, and at the same time, she must also make a detonator, and then she must create evidence to confuse the other person. A person slanders himself as the real murderer to save himself. What is the difficulty level? Or, is this possible? Muntali continued to ask. Su Gang was speechless, because it was impossible for Muntali to deliberately cover up Lucy in order to protect Lucy, so Muntali's words were still correct. This opponent is not simple. Subai's mood was a bit complicated. This dish of dirty water was poured on Lucy, but under Muntali's reasoning, it became a talisman for Lucy. Actually, we can reason from another angle. Diana looked at Lucy and asked, Lucy, when was the last time you went to the roof? Last night, before I prepared to attack Wang Yi, I went to check on the zombies, and then I went back to the room. About half an hour later, I completed the control and spell casting in the room, Lucy replied. This also means that from the moment Lucy left the roof for the last time last night to when we were on the roof together before, the real murderer went to the roof to arrange the strings. But after the explosion, basically all of us, except for you, Wang Yi, who was attacked by zombies, the rest of us opened the door and rushed to the kitchen. During that time, there was no time to go to the roof to arrange evidence. Diana analyzed very calmly. Then, during the day, we went out to investigate in batches. Chen Ming and I could testify against each other without leaving the possibility of arranging evidence. Wang Yi, you and Meng Tailai went to the peachwood forest outside the house. In other words, the only ones who have time to arrange evidence are Su Gang and Lucy. But since Lucy is the refiner of zombies, she has been ruled out of suspicion just now, that is to say, you, Su Gang. That's not right, Muntali said before Su Gang could speak to defend himself. That's not right, there is another person who has the time and opportunity to do this. That was the first one to go up the stairs to the roof, and the last one to the living room because he was attacked by zombies. Everyone looked at Subai again. Subai frowned slightly. Montalai really thought of himself as the murderer to collect evidence and make logical deductions. Moreover, the key point was that he was indeed the murderer. If he thought of himself as the real murderer and then deduced from the known conditions, you can get something smooth. Then please tell me why I put that string, Subai said. Since I have excellent proof of being attacked at the same time, my suspicion is the smallest, so why should I go to all the trouble? He arranged Zhao Rui to commit suicide and then deliberately changed the evidence. Muntari, you said before that Lucy could not be the murderer, so you found those three difficult things to do as a reason. So, I hope you can explain, why am I a murderer? If I was the real murderer, why would I arrange the strings? Didn't this clearly tell the person who made the zombies to attack me that Zhao Rui didn't commit suicide? What are the benefits to me of doing this? Muntari hesitated for a moment, as if he was thinking, but he quickly said, no, it's good. You are deliberately muddying the water, deliberately arranging. Subai stretched out his hand to signal Muntali to stop speaking, and then said, Peak's lesson is here, and I won't be so stupid as to bury me by doing superfluous things. First of all, I am not the murderer. Secondly, if we follow Diana's theory just now, then Su Gang is the most likely murderer. Baby Su Gang on the side heard this and wanted to speak again, but Subai didn't give him a chance to speak. But I don't believe that Su Gang would be so stupid as to deliberately lead Zhao Rui in the direction of suicide. If he was the real murderer, there would be no benefit in doing so at that time, because if he did nothing, everyone would still complain. If Zhao Rui considers suicide, he will naturally be safe, so there is no need to add any unnecessary extravagance. Secondly, I am the same. First, I will not arrange that false evidence. Second, it was me who first started to doubt whether Zhao Rui had really committed suicide during breakfast. Third, can you imagine that if I arranged a false evidence first, I would definitely be accused? Will Lucy expose the false evidence and then sit at the dinner table to overturn the inference in favor of me, the real murderer? Subai's three words left Muntali speechless. Furthermore, you seem to have forgotten one thing. Lucy controlled the zombies in the room to kill me. This means that during the time when Lucy came down from the roof to send zombies to kill me and when the explosion started, there were also people can use this opportunity to go to the roof to arrange this evidence. What's the motive? Muntali suddenly asked at this time. What is the murderer's motive for doing this? You just analyzed it? Neither you nor Su Gang had such a move. What if it's Zhao Rui? Subai said. For a time. The whole table. You can hear a needle drop. It seems like you have never suspected. Zhao Rui went to the kitchen in the middle of the night to make supper. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 832. While everyone was discussing in the restaurant, the old housekeeper sat alone on the sofa in the living room, with a pot of tea in front of him, pouring and drinking. He is the host and also the first spectator. When Muntali spoke, the old housekeeper showed a smile on his face, and the scene appeared in his mind. Old housekeeper, is someone dead? Subai, whose body was covered with bite marks and claw marks caused by zombies, seemed not to care about his injuries. He was only concerned about whether the explosion meant that someone was dead. Dead. The old housekeeper pointed to the bedroom door behind Subai, meaning that he was here to deal with the zombie. With one person already dead, the old housekeeper would not allow any surprises to appear in this room. An accidental death, at least on this day, is what it looks like. You should have a notice in your mind. The old housekeeper pointed at his head. Whoever kills whom will be notified in his mind. At least, the murderer is sure that he is the murderer. Otherwise, once the murderer is about to kill someone, and the murdered person chooses to commit suicide at the last moment, who does it count? For example, in the scene just now, Subai was fighting a zombie. If Subai bit his tongue and committed suicide just now, was he considered suicide or was Lucy killed? Broadcasters want stories to be complex and interesting, but they don't want them to be a mess. I'm just making sure. After saying that, Subai did not accept the bottle of anti-zombie poison handed over by the old housekeeper, but chose to walk in the opposite direction to the deepest part of the second floor, and followed the stairs to the roof. Have you shot yourself in the foot? The old butler thought to himself. He actually has another role, which is to jump out of the audience's perspective and watch the game from an insider's perspective, just like many large-scale games nowadays. On the live online stage, viewers can choose to switch between different camera views. Muntari, well hidden. The old butler seems to be very optimistic about this young man named Mentali. He has the right to show his emotions and appreciation. However, the old butler does not understand one thing very well, because in his opinion, some of Subai's arrangements are, it's a bit superfluous. It felt similar to Peek, who was smashed into the wall by himself in the last round. Now, someone who understands has stood up to pat you. How should you respond? Slowly. When Subai finally said the words, "Is Zhaorui looking for a midnight snack?" The old housekeeper also had a look of surprise on his face. When this conclusion is drawn, it seems to be a big circle, but it is precisely because the circle has been circled that it becomes more credible. The old housekeeper pondered and looked at the tea in his hand unconsciously. He felt that there should be other backups. Since Wang Yi had planned to kill Zhaorui from the beginning and pushed Zhaorui in the direction of suicide, besides pure for logical things, there should be a very clear backup, such as evidence. And this evidence should be very sophisticated, at least it can't be like that string, and it is a kind of evidence that makes sense even if it is placed there, and even if Zhaorui really committed suicide, it would be difficult to erase it. In an instant, although the old butler was still sitting on the sofa drinking tea, his figure appeared in every room on the second floor, and his eyes began to search every room. But there was nothing unusual in the room. Silently, the old housekeeper stood up. He now regarded himself as another player. In fact, this was the reason why broadcasting created him and placed him here. Throughout the house, all the other old butlers disappeared, and the old butler in the living room slowly faded away. Finally, the old butler appeared in the kitchen, but the people who were still very close to the kitchen in the dining room were not there at all. Noticed. The kitchen is still in a mess due to the gas tank explosion. Fortunately, there is food in the storage room and there is another set of kitchen utensils. Of course, if there are not originally, there will be them. The audience who participated in this game cannot be allowed to hear, while planning a murder to find the murderer, you still have to go hungry. The old housekeeper searched the messy kitchen, but he still couldn't find what he wanted to see: evidence, no evidence. If you just rely solely on logical reasoning to execute, it will not be 100% possible. No, no. There must be something else I'm missing. The old housekeeper thought this in his heart. His figure disappeared from the kitchen again and appeared on the sofa in the living room. He picked up the teacup again and fell into deep thought again. Zhao Rui's information began to pass through the old housekeeper's mind. Of course, it was not Zhao Rui's information in the real world, but what Zhao Rui saw through the old housekeeper's eyes and ears in this Zhao's villa. Suddenly, as if something suddenly occurred to him, the old housekeeper appeared on the roof. The string was still placed there. One section was on the roof, and the other section was hanging down along the eaves to the window of Zhao Rui's room. Location. The old butler squatted down in front of the string. He did not reach out to touch it because this was not allowed. His curiosity could only be satisfied without destroying the fairness of the game, such as his appearance. There will be no smell, no footprints, no turning or moving. When the old butler stared at this piece of string, he saw some burn marks on part of the string, which was most obvious at the end of the string where it hung down. Something burned on this. The old butler began to continue observing. He now had the pleasure of actively solving puzzles when he was an audience, even if this pleasure could only satisfy himself. Turn out to be. That's right. The old housekeeper stood up. He finally understood what Sudbai's real purpose behind leaving this evidence was. A picture like this appeared in the mind of old housekeeper Yu. Sudbai put the strings on one side, tied a string at the bottom of the strings, and then applied a combustion aid such as kerosene on the strings. Sudbai stood in his room, or some other hidden place, lifted up the strings, lit the cord below and watched the cord slowly burn out. At the same time, the burning of the cord also caused the piano to move upward due to the intensity of the fire. The ends of the strings were blackened. But another picture immediately appeared in the old housekeeper's mind, and that was the picture that the old housekeeper felt Sudbai wanted everyone to associate with this evidence. That is when Zhao Rui discovered that Lucy had come down from the roof. He leaned out of the window, and then threw the high-quality strings onto the roof. Because the ends of the strings were tied with a string in advance, Zhao Rui could adjust the angle of the strings by grabbing and pulling the string at the window below, and hanging one length down to face his window. Later, because of the height problem, Zhao Rui chose to use a fire to wipe the strings in advance. A layer of rope with a kerosene-like combustion accelerant was burned away, and rainwater could not extinguish the flames when kerosene burned. She didn't need to risk going to the roof past other people's rooms because it was raining outside. Lucy could quietly return to her room from the roof to change clothes, and then calmly control the zombies to attack Sudbai, but she, Zhao Rui, it was too late. She couldn't have gone to the roof to arrange the strings, then come down to change clothes, and then go to the kitchen to detonate the gas tank while Lucy was attacking Sudbai. If the old housekeeper hadn't known innately that Sudbai was the murderer, with this evidence alone, even the old housekeeper wouldn't have any room to refute. Did he already know Zhao Rui's identity? The old housekeeper murmured to himself, because if this logic is extrapolated, the prerequisite is that Zhao Rui knew what Lucy was doing and took advantage of it to cause this chaotic situation appear. Then he used the false evidence of the strings arranged by himself as a suicide to make living people think that the murderer is still alive. He should not have expected Lucy's zombie attack on her, but he should have known what Lucy was doing on the roof, but after being attacked by zombies, he was able to choose such a method in such a short period of time arrangement. The old housekeeper suddenly felt a little emotional. If the other 5 people who were still alive lost under such an arrangement, it's not really a pity. Things seem to have come full circle and returned to the issue of Zhao Rui's suicide. But this time, even Muntali couldn't refute anything. The inference that Zhao Rui committed suicide was initially overturned because the evidence of the string was too false. Everyone's performance and division of labor in this investigation is completely a circle of big paradoxes. And if Zhao Rui placed the string there, everything seems to make sense. She did it on purpose so that no one would think she committed suicide. Zhao Rui, what is your identity? Do you have any clues? Subai asked at this time. If you dare to come down to eat supper alone at night, you are really not afraid of death. She is a light magician. Her real name is Pulina. She and I have known each other in reality, Diana said at this time. She changed her appearance and turned herself into an oriental woman. Well, Zhao Rui, oh no, Pulina's room is close to Lucy's room, and the two of them sit opposite each other when eating, and they are also very close. Do you think Pulina had already figured out what Lucy was doing? She is a light magician. Even if she is an ordinary person now, she should be very sensitive to things like zombies, right? Chen Ming said at this time. No, Zhao Rui didn't have time to run up to place the strings after Lucy came down from the roof, then came down to change clothes and go to the kitchen to trigger an explosion and commit suicide. It actually took less than half an hour, plus our reaction time and prevention. The unexpected time is actually only about 10 minutes of real blank time. She can't make it in time, and she doesn't dare to gamble on these 10 minutes. Muntali spoke at this time, and then, as if he thought of something, he said to Su Gang. Go, take down the strings from the roof. It seems that because Muntali's previous performance was really impressive, Su Gang actually got up and ran towards the stairs. Subai, on the other hand, looked at Muntali with a normal expression. You are finally great too.